So, welcome to the Pier Arts Centre. My name is Parkinson. I'm the curator here in the gallery, and we're delighted to be able to open this exhibition by the internationally acclaimed photographer Martin Parr. Think of Scotland. The title of the exhibition is a group of works that was organised initially by Aberdeen Art Gallery and Magnum photos. The exhibition was first presented at the reopening of Aberdeen Art Gallery following a major refurbishment and expansion in November 2019. So, first of all, Martin, I'd just like to welcome you to this this meeting, as I'd like to call it. It's this online meeting, and we're going to have an informal tour around the exhibition, around 40 works on display. And I will ask a few questions just to prompt and to see if there are some issues and things that you'd like to talk about. Think of Scotland, obviously, is a group of works that represents your time in Scotland. You've been coming to Scotland for over 25 years, I believe. And I'd just like to ask initially, you've travelled the world, you've been to all kinds of places, cultures and different locations, taking unique photographs of all of these different places. But what brings you back to Scotland?
I guess I really like the place, and it's somewhere, because I have to do a lot of travel during the winter, although of course at the moment that's not really possible. So in the summer, I like to come to Scotland, and particularly to Scottish Islands. So most of the trips that I've done there have been exploring a particular set of islands. So this summer we went to Harris and Lewis. Many times I've been to Orkney, and in fact I've been to nearly all of the islands that are inhabited of Scotland, which is quite an achievement. There's something about an island which is quite magical, and I try and coincide it with the time. It's often August or late July when there are events on, such as agricultural shows, such as the Highland Games, because I like to photograph people, and that's the place where you actually find the community gathering together. So you'll find many of the pictures in this exhibition are taken at such events, because it's just an excuse really to actually see what the people are like, and they come out and they're enjoying themselves. It's the height of summer, and they have things to celebrate. Sadly, of course, this year the shows in Harris and Lewis that I'd been organised to coincide with were cancelled, but nonetheless the landscape there is still absolutely stunning, and we like to walk, we like to take the fresh air, and to just really explore the ever changing patterns and landscapes of Scottish Islands and Scotland indeed.
Great, well, that's really great to hear. So that leads so quite nicely into my next question, which is about visiting artists, visiting photographers. In Orkney, I'm sure you'll know that over the last 150 years, there have been many photographers have come from other places. I'm thinking in the 19th century of people like James Valentine and George Washington Wilson, really fine photographers who've come to Orkney and taken a particular angle about what they would like to document. More recently, in the 20th century, people like John Glover, one of the pioneers of early documentary colour photography, and Faye Godwin have all come and made unique images of Orkney. So I'd just like to know what you think about what visiting eye can bring to a place.
I think out of all the Scottish islands, Orkney seems to have the strongest tradition of not only artists, but in particular, I say photographers. So as well as the names you've mentioned, there's Gunnar Moba and Keith Allardyce, all of whom have either come to live on Orkney or been to visit here. And indeed, there's a wonderful book by Keith Allardyce on Stromness, which I'm sure you've seen, which is one of the sort of classic, iconic books about contemporary Scotland. Well, it was taken probably 30 years ago now, but it still is a wonderful book. I think there's a magic in Orkney, which I think photographers are attracted to. And although, we have the Strand association with Uists, I would definitely say that Orkney is, if you like, the photographic and artistic hotspot of the Scottish Islands.
Well, I'm sure that's quite true. There's certainly been a lot of artists and photographers, and from the early days have come to Orkney. But if you want to pan around the room slightly,
okay.
like just to look at these.
So yes, on the right
here.
there, that's a whaling station on the Isle of Harris. And that chimney, I actually found it again this summer, and it didn't look quite as dramatic. This is a coincidence where I got the light absolutely right. And you can see it's the positioning of the chimney in that sort of gap there that really sort of makes this picture. So that was just, you know, I think it was an awkward position to get into to capture that picture, but it gives the picture the presence that sort of makes it sort of spin off the page.
Well, yes, I was just going to ask about the composition. You know, it strikes me when we go around the exhibition, and these are two good examples that there's, you know, there's a kind of classical approach often to the way that you compose your painting, your photographs, almost in a way like a Renaissance painting. And I'd like to ask you how you feel about, you know, how your work fits with that kind of history of painting.
I'm aware of the history of painting, but it's not something I'm overly influenced by. And sometimes, as with the chimney we just looked at, you know, the composition is very carefully worked out. In a case like this, which is on the Isle of Skye, it's the Highland Games. This is just taken very quickly and very spontaneously. And the two flags this young girl are waving, the Scottish flags, are absolutely in the right position. So remember, in an event like this, I'd have taken maybe a couple of hundred pictures. And if I get 2 or 3 good ones, I think that's a very good day shooting. So this is just a case where everyone's in the right position, but it doesn't come easy to get everyone correctly placed like this. So it's sort of, the picture has some harmony. So it's really the perseverance that the photographer has to engage in to make these pictures work.
Yes, and it's that intuitive sense of knowing which is the right image to select, I guess. You know,
well, yeah, that's the easy bit. Is taking it that's the difficult bit, Andrew. I mean,
right.
You know, what you have to realize is all the hundreds of reject pictures I've taken in order to get to this one that really works.
Yeah.
But I don't want to show you those. You'd be bored stiff.
No. But maybe I'm reading into it myself. This, you know, there's certainly a formal quality to them that has a long history, and maybe that's just to do with figurative art, and you know what you're doing is continuing that long tradition, the way I see it anyway, of figurative art goes back through painting and all the rest of it.
This is because, Andrew, you know a lot more about. Yeah, this is because you know a lot more about the history of figurative art than I do.
Well,
I guess you know, I'm in a little photography bubble. It's not that I don't appreciate other artists, and I've always loved your display of modernist painters with the likes of you know, Roger Hilton and such like. But you know, I'm sort of more influenced by other photographers rather than by figurative art per se.
And in this room, sort of slightly larger, longer space, we've got a number of the Orkney works.
Yeah.
Up there, and if we pan around, I'd just like to focus a little bit on this photograph, Nardini's Café Largs, and just you often your subjects are often, you know, very ordinary. You know, in this case, an elderly lady eating an ice cream in a cafe, but somehow you alight on something that's extraordinary. Within that ordinariness, there's a kind of you know, a special, I don't know, a special glint or a special pulse that you managed to bring out. I just wonder how you kind of, you know, how you view the world and how you manage to find that thing that's ordinary but somehow extraordinary at the same time.
Well, this was shot on a camera which had a ring flash on and a macro lens. This is a very close-up lens, so it means I'm able to come up very close to the subject. And it's lit by a flash, but the flash is on either side of the lens, so it gives a very even light. So it's almost like a portable studio. And this is a camera I often employ for close-ups, and when I'm going to things like agricultural shows, I'll hone in on some of the food, some of the displays of the vegetables and such like. And this is a case in this very famous ice cream parlor in Largs, where I've honed in on the ice cream and the flour and the hands of the lady with the cutlery. So it's a very simple composition, and it's very effective at doing these close-up sort of simple compositions. And then when you blow them up to this scale, they do look quite remarkable. and it's almost forensic, if you like. So it's a different style of photography to the one I would normally employ with the normal standard to wide angle, which is what you see most of the pictures of in this exhibition.
Brilliant, yes. Well, there are some things that are characteristic of Scotland, shall we say. Maybe you pan around to this fabulous photograph, you know, which is classic Scottish summer.
Scottish holiday.
Summer holiday, you know, and that's sort of, you know, the idea of cliche and the kind of, you know, the things that people imagine, you know, kilts and haggis, and, you know, not seeing many haggises in your photographs, but that, you know, there's a play on all of that within your work, and this is a good, you know, it's a beautiful photograph, you know, but it does tell you something about the reality of Scotland, but also how it's perceived and what people think. It's cold and it's wet. Just
yeah, well, I mean, I often come when I'm in the summer in Scotland and we have 3 days of rain, and I'm looking at the south of England and it's bathing in temperatures of 30 degrees. I'm thinking, what am I doing up here? But then when you get a sunny day in Scotland, there's nothing quite like it. But this is indeed a classic sort of classic rainy picture. And I focus in on the rain on the windscreen, and then the road is out of focus and slightly dippled in the backdrop, and leads off as we go over the brow of the hill. So yes, again, this is an idea that I've explored many times. This is probably the best example of the classic rainy day in Scotland.
And just to continue that sense of the extraordinary and the ordinary, we'll maybe just look at these two photographs of prize-winning fruit and veg at the, I think it's two different shows maybe. It's the South Romsey show and the East Mainland show in Orkney. And I think, you know, I think it's about noticing. You know, it's the fact that you're going around the event, and you notice that these things are, you know, it's great. They've won first prize, third prize, but they're also really stunning images. You know, and I don't know how much you're, you know, seeking out that kind of thing the whole time, or is it a more organic?
I'm always looking out. This again was shot on the ring flash, the camera I just mentioned. I'm always looking out for these simple pictures, and the top picture there with the one bean and the first prize ticket. I mean, it couldn't be more simple, really. It's whoops, sorry, it's turning off my phone. Someone phoned me. Yes, so it couldn't be a more simple picture, and that's part of the joy of that particular photo, I think.
Yes, and I wouldn't want to stretch it too far, but links really nicely into our Bendicksons and, you know, the works upstairs. You know, there's a stark modernist aesthetic at play.
Yeah,
maybe that's pushing it.
And I wasn't even aware of that, you see.
Well, that's the beauty of having the gallery with different aspects, different elements.
Yeah.
We'll maybe move through into the smallest of the galleries and maybe finish up in there. So in this gallery, which is smaller in scale, obviously, we've installed the series of works of postboxes, rural postboxes around Scotland. And I think the thing that this kind of draws to my mind is that sort of sense of, you know, the world being in flux. You know, these are things that you would think, or people would imagine, are kind of permanent. You know, they're always going to be there. They're you know, fixtures. Of course, they're not, and you know, that's just the way things are. But you know, that sense of the photographs capturing a fleeting moment, and you know, that continuous sense of change, which is very apparent at the moment. And it's just, you know, you've been photographing the world for 50 years or so, and you know, looking ahead, just there's been enormous change over the last 50 years. You know, is it possible to, or can you imagine in the next few decades how things are going to shape up, and I imagine you'll continue to document things. But I just wondered how you feel about how things are going to change.
Well, I mean, society is changing constantly, and this year more so than the other, because you see everyone wearing masks. You go into a shop now, and you're surrounded by these sheets of perspex and plastics, shielding you from from the customers. And this is all things that I also have photographed. And the queues now for everything. I don't know what it's like in Stromness, but here in Bristol, you often get queues outside supermarkets, B&Q and such like. You probably have less people, so there's probably less queues. Well, people may be queuing to get into the Pier Arts Centre, of course.
Yes, yeah, no, we have queues. We've got queues too.
That's a good, healthy sign. But coming back just to the post boxes, I've always been fascinated by these amazing post boxes in the countryside, and I started to notice these and thought, well, I'm going to start to photograph them. And the more isolated, the more rural, the more beautiful they are, the happier I would be. And I've got them on the beach in Tiree. I've got them, you can see there, bottom left, and in the most beautiful places, and often miles and miles away from the nearest house. And I just got fascinated by these and would drive along looking literally for post boxes, and I would screech to a halt and see them, and often would have to come back later in the day to get the better light, because the light would be against me. So it became an obsession of mine. And in the end, I think I photographed about 60, 70 of these post boxes. And when you see them, you very rarely see any other building. It's just the post box in its splendid isolation. And of course, you've got the backdrop of the wonderful Scottish scenery. So it's a classic sort of typology where you think of one idea and you build it up and make a collection.
Brilliant. Well, this is the part where I think we can maybe ask some of the questions that we've been given from students that are studying photography at the Orkney College. That's okay. So there are very specific questions, so I thought I would just read them out verbatim. I'll give you the name of them. There are 5 questions. Some of them are in multiple parts, so just have to bear with me. But the first one's from a student called John Ferguson, and he says, I believe you once said about working long, hard hours to get a body of photography that a photographer needs, and this is a quote, a real belief in your ability to do what and to find a connection to the subject matter that is very personal, very subjective. And the question is, how do you go about achieving that connection, or do you mean something that you only connect with internally? And also, how much does establishing that connection mean when choosing to take an image or not?
Well, absolutely, yeah. So the important thing with a photographer is to make that connection to the subject matter, and it's that sort of connection which you can explore and try and manifest itself. And of course, finding the right connection for the right person is not always that easy. So you have to identify what your interests are. You have to find a subject that you feel strongly about, start to explore it, and then start the journey of establishing this connection, which is ultimately going to be the thing that will reveal good photographs. So the challenge is to find the right subject, find something that you're really intrigued by, and you're drawn into it as a subject matter. And then once you go on that journey, you'll find that the good work will unfold. The danger is if you just try and think, I want to be a good photographer, what's going to be the right subject for me, is not necessarily going to work, because that connection to the subject is the thing that ultimately will make the work more worthwhile. So yes, same applies to students, same applies to photographers like myself as well.
Good, well, thank you. So the second question is from Sarah Wiley, and it's about lockdown. So how has lockdown been for you? What creative challenges has it presented? And did you adapt your creative practice with the restrictions? And what made you make the transition from black and white photography, so more than one question, to colour photography? And finally, what advice would you give a photography student at an early stage of their career?
Well, that's 3 questions.
Yes.
But so starting with the lockdown, I mean, yes, it's been difficult for me insofar that people is my main subject. So in the early days of lockdown, there was hardly anyone on the streets, but then I started to photograph queues. And this morning I was out photographing people with masks on. So in between time, in the summer, I was able to photograph people at beaches, Because although the events were cancelled, people were still going to the beach, people were still getting out and about. And indeed, even the landscape, you know, I was photographing scarecrows that were being exhibited in the Isle of Harris. And black and white to color, that happened, you know, when I started out as a photographer in the 70s, you know, black and white was the established sort of format. And then I started to see color photographers coming from America and thought I'd give it a go. And once I got into color, I never really looked back. And then if you like, the last question about what advice do I have to a young student, I'd come back to my first question or first answer about making that connection. That's the important thing to do. That's what you've got to look for. That's going to be the thing that makes your work come alive. So yes, I would apply my first answer to that third part of the second question.
Okay, great. So, the third question is from Chiara and Kenzie. So it's in reference to Think of Scotland, the exhibition at Aberdeen, and now here. You previously mentioned, and this is a quote, exploring the mythology of place and the reality of it. I think the collection does this well. I'm wondering, do you feel over your 25 years photographing Scotland, photographing Scotland, that you can chart the changing myths and realities through your work? I'd also like to ask how much significance you would put on your type of camera or materials, etc., in terms of technical quality as opposed to the image and seeing showing.
Starting out with the last bit, I mean, the pictures of the post boxes, they were the last project I did on film. So they're 2¼ square these days, and most of the pictures in this exhibition are done on a Canon digital camera. And you can see the quality is quite amazing that you can get when you blow up the prints big. What was the first bit of the question, Andrew?
It's about, so over 25 years of photographing,
Yeah. Well, I like cliches. I often start with cliches, and Scotland has lots of cliches from you know, everything that you'll see at the Highland Games through to the things you'll see at the agricultural show. And I start with cliches and then try and subvert them or do something with them. So it's often my starting point, and then I'll try and tease it out and give it my own particular spin.
Right. So a couple of short questions now to finish off. So one from Gail McGregor. Just simply, do you have three photographs in the exhibition that you would put at the top of your list of favourites?
We went by Guruk Lido, which is one of the most iconic pictures I've ever taken. That's the one of the guy swimming with the grey sky. He sold out print. I could have sold it 3 or 4 times over. So it's probably been the most successful picture I've ever taken in the last 25 years or so. So you'll see it here, and of course it's just the colour and the catching this one guy swimming across the pool. But it's really the contrast between the bright blue of the pool and the grey sky of Scotland. This is in Guruk near Glasgow, and it's one of those pictures you dream about taking. They don't often happen in your life when you get an icon like this that everyone seems to like. So that, I know I'm not doing the other two, but I'm just going to leave it with that one.
Okay, that's fair enough. And so, final question from the students. This is Yolanda Bruce. So, it's how many countries have you visited? Good question to ask. And which is your favourite country and why? That's more difficult. And what projects are you working on next?
Well, I'm going to say, I mean, I do love photographing in the UK, and of course, as you well know, Scotland is one of my favourite corners. Hardly a corner; it's a whole country in its own right. And I guess I'm going to say Scottish Islands are the thing that I'm really attracted to. And in terms of my own work, I don't have a major project. It's just a slow build-up of more pictures, going into the archive, looking again at cues. You know, I've yet to work out exactly what I'll be doing with the pandemic and that time. So yes, I'm sort of thinking about that and working on it. But it's not an easy thing to come up with something original on. So yes, I'm working out what to do by going out to photograph people walking down the streets with masks, etc., which is something you've never seen before. So for me, it's all, when we'll look back on this period and we'll remember, you know, this year and potentially the early part of next year as being an extraordinary time in in the life of Britain. So, you know, I intend to document that as well.
So obviously it was meant to open much earlier than this in the beginning of the year, but we're really delighted that we've been able to bring it to our audiences here in Orkney, and you know, obviously would be much happier if you were able to be here in person, but thank you for being here in a virtual way at least. Thank you, Martin.
Pleasure, and it's great to see the show up in the gallery, you know, in real time as we have done today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.